Grace to you and peace in Jesus Christ our Lord. Thank you for being at this special edition of the Dean's Forum for our special guest, Pádraig Ó Tuama, who was here yesterday on a glorious presentation of poetry and spirituality, and part of our spirituality conference is to have him back on the Dean's Forum Sunday morning. Some of you were here yesterday, but many of you were not. You were in for a treat. The topic will be different today, but it'll be the same wisdom and the same wit and the same glory. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this gathering. Thank you for this community. Thank you for the sweet rain that replenishes the earth. Thank you for the sweet spirit that replenishes us together inside. We gather and pray in the name of that refreshing spirit. Amen. I won't give you the details of Pádraig Ó Tuama. He's Irish. He spends a lot of time in New York, a lot of time in Ireland. He spent a lot of time with parolees and living in community with people who are out of prison. He spends a lot of time writing poetry and spends a lot of time teaching writing and teaching poetry. We're going to, I hope, get a bit of all of that this morning. So without further ado, please welcome to the cathedral, Pádraig Ó Tuama.
Good morning, everybody. It is lovely to be here. I see some faces from yesterday that I recognize, and I see some faces I don't, so it's nice to be here. We're going to look at a gospel text this morning. I worked in Belfast for about a bit over 20 years as a conflict mediator, and I have an interest really in what happens when we give some attention to the experiences of conflict that we're in. First of all, I'd like you to reflect on a question. What are you like in conflict? And don't just think of the worst parts of yourself. And don't just think of the best parts of yourself. Think of things that are in the middle. And you might want to think about this when it comes to big political conflicts of the day, as well as things that happen around people you love. What are you like? Do you withdraw? Do you get ready for a fight? Do you fall apart? Do you want to avoid? Do you want to talk about it at great length? Do you want to talk about it at small length? Does the conflict that you grew up with find a way to leak like a virus into the conflict of today? Are you frightened? Are you relaxed? Do you see it as an opportunity? Where does the feeling of whatever you feel lodge in your body? Do you just kind of find yourself thinking, no, it doesn't even bother me. If there's a conflict, we talk about it, easy. Or do you think if there's a conflict, I can't think about anything else until we've talked about it? I'll give you a minute just to think about what some of your conflict behaviors are like. It's obviously different if you've got power or if you don't. If you've got a conflict with your boss, that's one experience. If you are the boss, that's another experience. If there's no defined roles, that's another experience again. Just have a think. What do you like? Where do the feelings sit in your body? Where is the worry? Where is the opportunity? Where is the joy? Take a minute. And another question. Is there a certain kind of experience that has followed you through your life where you realize, oh, here we are again, that old conflict has cropped up again, feeling misunderstood perhaps? And you go, I felt misunderstood with my friends when I was a teenager, I felt like it at college, I felt like it in my 30s, and now in my 50s, it crops up. Different people, different circumstances, but it's just an old ghost of misunderstood. Or is it that you feel passed over? Is there something that's an old ghost of conflict that's been around for you for a long time that crops up in different places? I don't ask this to judge you or analyze you. I don't have any theory as to why that might be. I'm just curious about the phenomenon of it for you. as to whether there is. We're going to think a little bit today about a spirituality of conflict. And what does it mean to practice some spirituality in the experience of conflict? And I want you to hold your own body, your own feelings, as well as some stories that have followed you throughout your life. It might be a very personal story of, feeling like you're passed over by people who aren't paying attention to your worth. It might be a systemic story where you are saying, this has been something that has followed me throughout my life because of systemic prejudice. It might be a conflict that you find yourself in with yourself the whole way throughout your life. It could be all of those things as well at the same time, and others. I don't want to talk in theory about conflict without recognizing that we are bodies who carry conflict with us and who are in conflict. I'll say a few things about conflict, and then we're going to look at a text and discuss conflict through the lens of the text. Conflict is amoral. There would be no art without conflict. I'm a poet. I would not have any poetry to write if I wasn't in some kind of conflict with myself. And so the question for me is, what is the quality of the conflict? Is it productive or is it destructive? And that's something to find a relationship with. Some people hate conflict even when it seems like everybody around has got a really positive way of dealing with the conflict. And they can actually focus and learn and change and have a conversation and understand each other better. Some people go into high conflict mode very quickly, and in high conflict mode become domineering and aggressive, and they only see one way out, which is to win. And often to win means to shame or annihilate the others. So those are two extremes. And you've probably found yourself in different situations, different parts of your life, in different circumstances, depending as to how safe or unsafe you were within the context about what kind of conflict you're facing. I'm not going to ask you to share anything private or personal about this. There's going to be no pointed questions to ask you to share anything. I want you to feel safe with that. But it is a good thing for us to talk together as a community about conflict. And what does it mean to have a spirituality of conflict? And by that, I just mean, what's it like to know how it is that you breathe when you're in conflict? Spirituality, the word comes from spirare in Latin, meaning to breathe. Often conflict can feel suffocating. And I'm interested in conflict having space to breathe, and space to learn, and space to be open. Jesus of Nazareth had a very particular and peculiar approach to conflict. He was happy to start it, happy to keep it going, happy to escalate it at times, and happy to address it. I do not think that being a conflict mediator was one of his primary interests. He wasn't saying, let's get together in a circle and you have your time and you have your time, and then we'll check in with our feelings and then we'll talk about things. That's what I do. He was not overly interested in that from the literature we have about him. However, he did have, what's clear from the literature, he had some fascinating approaches to the questions of discussing what it is that conflict knows, the intelligence of conflict. And we're going to look at a text here. Let's try to recreate the text before we look at it. You know that text where there is an argument among the disciples? There's probably lots of them, but I'm particularly thinking of one in the 9th chapter of Mark. Can anybody remember a particular detail? If you know it all by heart, just give us one detail. Don't recite the whole thing beautifully for us. If you shout it out, I'll say it back into the microphone. Who is the greatest? Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking about. What other details about that text from Mark's Gospel can you recall? Who is the greatest is the question.
Jesus says, the greatest among you will be your servant.
The greatest among you will be your servant. Yes, he upends the question of power. Anybody else have a recollection of that text? Let's look at it. This is from the 9th chapter of Mark. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about along the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all, and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Short text, very short, important, memorable, but short. A little bridging text, really, in Mark's Gospel. I'd like to go through it bit by bit, and then we'll have a discussion. The first part, then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "Why the house?" It doesn't say whose, but it does say where, Capernaum. He has been here previously in Mark, that time when the roof was taken off the house for that fella to be lowered by his friends. That's also called the house. And you can make an argument that the here from Greek could be translated as his. And certainly Jesus of Nazareth spends a lot of time in Capernaum in Mark's Gospel. It seems that he's living there, clearly. And so there is the possibility, absolutely, on the table of interpretation here, to think that they're in his home. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in his house, he asked them. That is entirely possible as a translation from the Greek text. And so what we have here possibly is a situation of hospitality. I mean, whose ever house it was in, they were in a situation of hospitality. It just might have been his, which might be relevant. And he says to them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" Dialogikos is the Greek word here for arguing. But the inference isn't what were you dialoguing about along the way. The inference is arguing along the way. And they were silent. What an interesting thing to say. They were silent. One of the possibilities for you when you're in a situation of conflict is one of silence. Perhaps one of shame, perhaps one of lack of confidence, perhaps one of confidence, but not confidence in yourself, but not knowing the ground you're on. Wanting to show deference to hierarchy. Maybe you just think, well, I do have thoughts, but actually in this situation, it's not appropriate for me to be the one to share them. But it's so interesting that they are silent. We're not told why. Perhaps they were ashamed. Perhaps they thought, oh, we didn't think he heard.
That's the question.
Yeah.
So, I think the way is, when you're speaking of the way is the lifestyle, the way is
Yeah.
all encompassing. And so, I kind of get my feelings hurt when you said that to me, because, what were you arguing about in this great new way of life?
Yeah. Yes, I know. Hodos is the word for way here, and it's what the early Christians were called, and Mark's Gospel is the early Gospel, the earliest of the 4 canonical Gospels. It could be that the Christians of the world are defined by the fact that when people say, "Who's a Christian?" and somebody might go, "Oh, they're the people who ask themselves at the end of the day, at the end of every single day, what were we arguing about along the way?" That's what Christians are known for. A deep personal reflection. It comes from their scriptures. They ask themselves that. They feel like they're on the way. And so they ask themselves, they pay close, careful attention to what they were arguing about along the way as part of their commitment to spirituality. Wouldn't that be a nice planet? And you're right, that especially throughout the corpus of the New Testament, less so perhaps in Mark, but Hodos, the way, is an enormous motif of this. But it is the possibility of thinking, what would it be like for you if once a day for a year you took 3 minutes and just thought, what have I been arguing about along the way? Just for quiet attention while the kettle boils. If you're kettle boiling people in this country of America where the tea is terrible. I bring my own. I want you to know, with entire judgment of your complete country. What were you arguing about along the way? To find a way to just let yourself drop into a safe, quiet reflection, which just means that the things that arrest, captivate, kidnap your attention, you might go, oh, that was tough. But I actually know that today I'm going to have those 3 minutes to just sink into, what was that experience like? And what you'll find is after a month, after 2 months of doing that you'll begin, when you're in the situation where something's arresting you in conflict, or you find yourself starting a conflict, you'll have a small bit of space between what you're in and the space you're going to create for yourself in those 3 minutes. And you become the self observing the self, which is a way we can talk about prayer and contemplation. And you can learn something. I'm not going to say what you'll learn, because who am I to say? But there's the possibility of learning something. Not for the purpose of just keeping calm, because everybody needs to keep calm. You might realize, you know what I've learned? I need to stick with the conflict because it's important, this particular one. So it isn't tone policing, it's observing, noticing, and seeing within the context of such an observation, such a noticing, what it is that's important to say, when it is that you're silenced, and when it is that, like Jesus here, you're actually turning the heat up. But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. What do you think the measure of greatness was amongst these group of people? What do you think their measure of greatness was? I'm curious. You can shout it out and I'll call it back. I'm not looking for one answer. I'm curious what you think. So I'm not looking for the person who can read my mind. So, who was the favorite of Jesus? Yeah, that's a great. I'm sure everything you say will be accurate. I'd love to hear lots of different thoughts. Thank you. The best disciple, the one who gets the gold star. Congratulations. Best disciple of the day. Yeah. Who did he trust the most? What do you think the measure of trust was? Understanding. Okay. Who was the leader? Yeah. Who had the leadership capacity? Yeah. Amongst the 12. Yeah. Quite apart from Jesus. Yeah. Who's most forgiving? That would be a nice measure of greatness. Somebody over here. Who was his favorite? And how do you think that they would have measured the favorite? What's that? I'm struggling to hear. Would he have even had a favorite? The gospel. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're always arguing with ourselves about something. And it's when they're in the house. They do have a hospitable gathering point. But I'm interested in your question. How do you think the favorite would have been measured in this context? Who was able to convince others? Yeah. The one with the best recruitment methodologies. The best marketer of the day. Yeah. Yeah, it's the original language. I've looked it up. I know some. Call them all. Humble, yeah. Aggressive, sure. All of them. Who would be the great? Okay. Who would be the greatest? Thank you. So that it's not about a measurement of what's happening now, it's about potential. What an interesting direction of time you've brought into this. Thank you. How interesting. When I used to be very involved in churches when I was much younger, and I kept on being told, what's that verse from Timothy about, the youth and the leadership, and I knew that I was getting beyond that when nobody was giving me that verse in my birthday cards anymore. So my future had arrived, apparently, and it was not what people thought it would be. Proximity, access, and attention to Jesus. Yeah. All of these things, I think they're all measurements of that. How does it work in your religious life? How do you measure the greatest? Is it who tithes the most? Is it which service has the most amount of people coming? Or which congregation around the city has the most amount of people coming? Or which congregation around the city was the first with the statement about the thing that needed to be said in public? Where are the measures of comparison that you find occurring in all of these? Comparison is a cancer. It does not know how to die. It is a terrible thing that can rip your life apart by growing and growing and growing and growing. And to give it attention is to recognize that it wants more attention and more attention. It can be very difficult to look at comparison and to analyze it and to stop doing that, because even analyzing it is still giving it more attention. It's a complicated thing to know what to do with. Argued with each other who was the greatest. So then he sits down and he calls the 12 back to the house. Now, sitting down might seem like relaxing, but probably in the culture of the time, that was an indication that he was the teacher and he was assuming the posture of the teacher, and that typically the teacher would sit and the others would stand. So that tends to be how to understand from various cultural texts of the day. So doing that is actually him taking control. It isn't what we might understand. Sit down on the comfortable chairs. And he says to them, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. So, as you said, he's turning the hospitality, he's turning the question of power on his head. If you want to be first, you must be last. And servant of all, doulos, from which the word doula comes. And then there's this curious part. Then he took a little child from the convenient shelf of children to be used for illustrative purposes, which everybody has in their house in case you need to procure a child in order to be able to make a point to men who are worried about measurement and size, and puts it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whose child? What was the child doing? Was this his house? If it was his house, whose child was it?" It's entirely arguable in Mark's gospel that this is Jesus' house, entirely from the Greek, especially because of his return to Capernaum. And this would mean that this was the same house where the roof had been taken off. I used to feel sorry for the person whose house it was where the roof was taken off until I realized it might have been Jesus' house. And then I thought, it's his own fault. I've got no sympathy for him whatsoever. He took a little child and put it among them. So it might have been his own child. That's entirely possible. The domestic arrangements of very few people are given in any context in the Gospels. But what's so interesting is that in the abstract idea about what's going on as to who the greatest is, whatever the measurement of that is, all these things, in the abstract idea, Jesus looks around. He looks around to see, how can I bring you back into time? Your point about the possibility of grandeur in the future. Jesus stages an intervention that's about the absolute moment, right here, right now. And how can he use his imagination, intelligence, and body, because he puts his arms around the child, to do something in the here and now that embodies the opposite of the driving anxiety that you find in the text. Whatever that driving anxiety was, the measurement of the greatness, we don't know. It could have been all kinds of things. They each could have had different measurements about what the greatness would be. But he is entirely located in the present moment because he just finds somebody right among them up until now, we would be entirely forgiven for thinking that the only people in the house were Jesus and these followers. What we hear from this text is that there's other people who were perhaps deemed irrelevant in the context of this. So Jesus looks at a person in the house who had hitherto not been considered to be one of the candidates for the greatest, and says, hello, let's look here. Let's have a consideration as to who do you see? Where are your eyes turned? Are your eyes turned in competitive analysis and comparison towards each other? Or are your eyes turned toward the here and now, towards who is in the room, toward the question of your disposition in the room towards those who are actually in the room, not just those whom you see, because of course we all know that there are circumstances where either you are overseen or you have overseen others, or both. And he directs attention to the here and now, about what is happening here. His intervention is an intervention of time and presence and sight and tangibility, which is a fascinating intervention that's happening. So often in the question of conflict, your mind can go in all kinds of places, to the future, to the past, to the all around, towards what's going to happen if this escalates, to the fortune telling that can occur. I listen to too many political podcasts, and so many of them take what's happened today and then fantasize about, well, what's that going to mean in 2026, in 2028? What's that going to mean in the following? What's so interesting is that Jesus' intervention is not about the future. It is about right now. And he interrupts fantasy and fear with the present. And that is such an interesting thing, to essentially say, look right here. Who is here? Who do you not want to notice? Who have you noticed? What an interesting intervention. And he is escalating this conflict, because he is intervening and, in a certain sense, challenging them about what is it that's driving you. And he doesn't even seem to be too interested in a long psychoanalytical approach to the driving factors of compulsive behavior between people when it comes to power. He just says, do this. It's a very, very interesting intervention. I do lots of group work, and if if one person in group work is beginning to attack the other, you just stop it. You just go, that's irrelevant. We're stopping it. We're not going to hear you say, oh, well, what I really meant was, no, you've gone into attack mode. No. Because if we give you time calmly to explain why you're attacking somebody, that's still giving you attention, when actually that's the wrong direction to go at the moment. Possibly you need to be the one to say, here's something that I want to reveal about myself, about my attack, but not justifying your attack in other people in a calmer voice. And this is an interesting intervention that Jesus does by completely intervening into what would escalate into a tornado, a dust devil between these characters. Just it would increase and increase and increase. And his intervention is one of the present moment, is the one of perhaps turning to the one in the room who would never have skin in the game in terms of winning the competition of greatness among them. And it just emphasizes it over and over. He took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. His intervention into the question of greatness is an intervention of hospitality, which is a very interesting political intervention into the measurement of greatness that's occurring between people. So, let's take some conversation together. Is there a microphone that can go around? And I'd like to, you might have a question, you might have a thought. Just going to check the time, so I don't keep you good people too late. There's a few here. There's microphones coming so that everyone can hear you easily.
Thank you for this.
A bit closer.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for this. I had always sort of interpreted this because it comes right after a discussion around the transfiguration.
Correct.
That this was less about competition between the 12 and more about, the greatest being God, or maybe Jesus versus Moses and Elijah, in the context, and reintroducing who he is, the Son of God.
Okay. Yeah, it is a very interesting context within that, yes. But it seems to be that he's addressing them and their silence as well. Yeah. But it is a very interesting thing. I must look at it again to think about, because of course he had taken 3 of the disciples with him, which of course would have introduced some jealousy, perhaps. In the front here.
Yeah. I'm also very grateful for your presentation. Thank you. So the text does not say they argued with one another about who was the greatest among them. Mm-hmm. So that's your point, I gather.
Yeah.
That it could have been who was the greatest. But how about, but you're suggesting that if you're in a leadership role in a group, someone in a group is attacking someone else in the group, that your role as a leader is to intervene and not let that continue. And you're suggesting that Jesus here doesn't offer them an opportunity to explain why they were arguing. He doesn't say,
yeah.
He doesn't, tell me all about it. What was your motivation? But that implies that he was asking a rhetorical question. He asked them, "Who were you arguing about on the way?" As if he's not really interested in the answer to that question, because he wants to intervene. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want it to. He doesn't want the argument to resume.
Yeah.
He wants to shut it down.
Yeah.
So you're suggesting it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, and I think a question that's implying that he knows what was going on, that he was not hearing. Yeah. This is why I don't think Jesus was particularly interested in conflict mediation. Because if in conflict mediation you're taught never ask a rhetorical question, because people will correctly feel like it's a trap. If I asked a rhetorical question, like, so for instance, what were they arguing about? And I had what was the measurement of greatness? And I had an imagination in my mind about the proper answer. And all of you people, whoever said this, I was like, nice idea, and I just kept on waiting for somebody to guess what was in here. That's profoundly manipulative, to do that. Lots of us have seen that in schoolroom situations where the teacher says, who can tell me the important thing that happened last week? And you're all hoping to become the greatest by guessing. And lots of important things happened last week. And so Jesus' interest here is not discursive. It's control. And there's nothing wrong with control. The question is for what purpose are you using it? Also, in his sitting down, he is absolutely confident in his role as teacher in the context here. Here, and then I'm going to look over here just in case there's other people that I've been neglecting.
So I slipped back into my 16-year-old brain when I was doing SAT reading comprehension. So if you do the back half of the reading and you talk about whoever welcomes, so welcoming being receiving something, so receiving Jesus' teachings, let's say, and then you tie that back to greatest. So it would almost imply, because of how the reading ends, to say when they were arguing about the greatest, it would be who was the greatest at receiving my learning or receiving my teachings from it. And I think what then Jesus is now trying to do with the back end is to basically say, you guys are asking the wrong question. So instead of trying to mediate this, and he never answers it after this, he just says the real answer to the question is something different entirely, and leaving them with that.
Yeah, he upends, he pulls the rug from beneath their feet perhaps. And it's not just about message. It's clear, whoever welcomes one such child in my name, it's about the embodiment of a person rather than the measurement of their greatness. And it is an anthropological turn that he does toward people rather than toward ideas or demonstrations of power or favoritism or whatever else it is that seems to be on in their mind. I'm not proposing, let me be really clear, I'm not proposing that this is the only way to think about conflict. It's just an interesting experience of looking at conflict through the lens of this text. So, over here.
It brought something to my mind about being a mother, and sometimes we'd been out somewhere or the kids have been arguing and bickering and things. And my feeling was almost like, listen, guys, before we get in the house, stop it. You know, to deal with it. And if you can't, run around the block a few times, get your energy out. And then, so my thing was, I want it to be nice in my house, you know? I want it to be calm and everything to be nice. And so, but there was Jesus. He knew full well, he knew they were arguing, and he knew what they were on about. But he was so confident and so secure, and he could put his arms around that as well. He could contain it, and he wasn't worried. And he was able just to bring it in and deal with it there at home. And yeah. Something I'd struggle with to,
There's something that you're speaking about in the confidence and security there, because when you see something happening and think, actually, I could stage a useful intervention, you sometimes might undermine your own intervention by the question of, how will I be seen? How will they see me? How do I see me? And begin to undermine yourself, even though later on, when things have escalated and eventually calmed down, you might have thought, actually, you know what, I saw that from the word go, and I didn't say anything because I was worried about my position. Did I have the right? Did I have this, etc. I'm not saying, again, this is not a template for everything, but it does reveal something back to us. As we look at the text looks back at us and can reveal that one of the questions for some people can be, maybe you need to just assume that it's okay for you to assume a role for a while. Okay. For other people, you probably need to think, maybe it's good for me to step away from a role for a while. Different people have different dispositions. Some people have overt confidence and think they know everything and just storm right in. And other people assume that they know absolutely nothing. Neither of those will serve us. And the question is really about that old question of moderation and reflection. What else does this text reveal to you? Think back to also what you thought about your own behaviors in conflict when I asked you at the start.
I love your concept that Jesus might have owned a house and had a child. I mean, some might think that heretical, but to be fully human, without that, he hasn't really had the fully human experiences that we've all had. So I think that's a fantastic thing to think about.
I wrote about this in an essay once, and one of the editors at the place that was publishing it, the word heretical to me. And I was like, I don't think you know what heresy is if you're accusing me of heresy about a very straightforward proposal about the interpretation of a pronoun, so in Greek. And all this is doing is saying, what would it do to your imagination if this were true? You mightn't like it, that's fine, but have at least 5 interesting ideas on the table of interpretation, because then you'll choose between good ideas rather than, well, here's the right way and here's what all the fools think. I mean, that's not going to serve you.
I could totally get all of this wrong. Let me start maybe by saying when I read this, my initial thought on whose house it was more Matthew's than anyone else. Simply because we know that he had a house. I kind of, in my readings, don't think that Jesus would probably have a house. I think, anyway, that's me. But when I read it through the Matthew lens, right, I kind of come back to the disciples' acceptance of Matthew into their group. And we're kind of well along the way here. And then I think about how Jesus continues to reinforce, right? This is not the first time that he has reinforced things like Matthew, hey, why are we eating with tax collectors and sinners and so forth? But I think when he takes 3 of them, the top quartile, right, it's going to immediately and innately say, are you in the top 3? Or who's the top 1 if we have a top 3, right? And so on the way back, he's approaching it and putting a different lens and saying, hey, let me come at this from another direction. And then I get to the part, right, with the end of it, and I think the entire thing hinges on what it means to welcome, right? And we can go to hospitality, but I can also think in the, especially at the time, right, the reverence that is shown by a younger person to an older person, whether that's 1 year or decades, that's ingrained to me in that statement. And so whether we replace welcome with love or from a host, perspective, I think there's a lot that you can discuss just on the welcome aspect of it. So,
Yeah. Yes, it is. I haven't looked at Mark's characterization of Matthew enough to know whether you could argue that this is Matthew's house. I must look at that. Oh, the microphone's going to come to you so we can all hear.
It seems like your work, am I doing this right?
Yeah.
Is trying to reach a consensus over something. I'm interested in, would we ever reach a place as human beings where hierarchies and reaching consensus, how could we make that happen? Because when people are creating, like Bill Gates, they're in a garage, they're working together with people, but when they create something, they can market, and it changes the world. There have to be hierarchies to somehow manage things.
You're introducing a word, I'm not sure if I did, but you're introducing a word of consensus. Tell us a little bit about your curiosity about consensus and why you have been evoked to think about consensus from this text.
Well, I'm wondering if that's the next place humanity has to come from, but I can't figure out how we do it when we're in big groups. I mean, everything, religion is a hierarchy and has done horrible things through the centuries. Government's the same thing, and we're watching that happen now in our country. We could stand back and watch it happening everywhere and go, oh, poor them.
Yeah.
But now it's poor us. So I don't know what else to say. I'm questioning.
Yeah, clearly.
Is there an alternative that would work?
I mean, in this context, I don't know that he's looking for consensus. He's being very directive. There's no consensus being modeled here. He's assuming the role of the teacher and wanting them to know what it means to follow wisdom. And that is complicated because, as you rightly highlight, there's models of changing group behaviors. Sometimes it's consensus, sometimes it's following a leader who has something wise to say, sometimes it's following a leader who has something unwise to say. And sometimes you have consensus for a while and then it splinters and splits apart. And these are models that you know from your own life. It's such an interesting thing.
Double dip here. I was once reprimanded by an elder.
Hold the top of the microphone, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I was once reprimanded by an elder. He said to me, hierarchy is not bad. Bad hierarchy is bad. And then the way you're describing Jesus here, he's not afraid of conflict. He's not conflict avoidant. I don't know if you wanted to use that word at some point. And I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis's description of Aslan in the Narnia series. He's not a tame lion.
Yes.
He can be ferocious and he's ready to take on whoever.
Yeah.
Although, before Pilate, he's like the lamb who was silent.
It's so interesting. I mean, you use the term conflict avoidant, which lots of us have heard these days. You look at Jesus at different depictions in different Gospels, and at different times, he seems to exhibit an interest in escalation of conflict. And at other times, about taxation, he's just like, oh, well, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. He seemed to understand what for him were his driving forces and his driving interests. And those were not the same as other people, because the taxation system was unjust, but he did not give an enormous amount of time to it. One of the interesting things in all conflict behaviors is that probably at different times all of them will serve you fruitfully. The question is are you stuck in one form of conflict behavior, or can you move fluently between a few different kinds? If you're always conflict avoidant, that's probably not going to serve you. If you know how to be conflict avoidant when maybe your neighbor is causing a bit of conflict, but they've just been through a terrible grief, that's being able to conflict avoid for a while will serve you in that situation, because you just think, they're falling apart. Look, we can look at this in a month or something. So Jesus does exhibit different models, and one of the psychological questions from the literature is to think why and what motivated him to conflict escalation here, and not too much involvement there. Sometimes it seems to be if somebody's excluded from the community, that he was particularly motivated to be directly confrontational about, have you seen this person? That seems to be, in my reading, one of the things that you see time and time again. Whether that's the woman who breaks into the house, or not breaks, but makes her way into the house in Luke's Gospel in Luke 7, or Zacchaeus later on in Luke. Zacchaeus, who was wealthy, and this woman who had a bad reputation in the town, whether she deserved it or not. Both of these characters were people whom people wished to keep silenced. And this child here too perhaps hadn't been seen. People weren't reading the geography of the room, the political, the power geography of the room, in order to allow themselves to be changed by the information and intelligence that's present in the composition of the room.
Yeah, so that's what strikes me is the sentence, they were silent, as you talk about silence, because they don't say anything in this whole paragraph. And to me, it strikes me as it's all about listening and how, you get to, you need to listen.
Yeah, it is. Say why you say listening. I'm just curious why the word listen comes to your mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you think about silence, then you have to be thinking or listening and, incorporating in what's being said by the master.
Yeah. Thank you. As we move to an end, we're going to finish in just a couple of minutes. This is not a comprehensive instruction manual for what you need to do in all conflict situations. It's one reading of one text in conversation with each other. But what today does this text suggest to you that you might want to think, I'm going to try that? Just one thing. What does this text suggest to you to try? It'll be different for different ones. I'm curious. I'd like to hear from a few people. The microphone will come to you, yeah.
I want to be the apostle, and I want to be silent.
Oh. And what motivation do you want for your silence?
Well, I've asked 2 or 3 questions in here, and I tend to talk a lot, so I think it's better.
Thanks. There's somebody behind you.
Just for me. So.
Yeah, you're all speaking for yourselves.
Perhaps, in response to your question, the answer, which is demonstrated by Christ throughout the Gospels, is to think about questions from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
Not go with the flow, not be in consensus with those around you with regard to the question, but to come at it from a completely outside. Those who have accomplished great things, whether Christ through the Bible or even today, in present day man, those great entrepreneurs or great leaders, whether it's Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt or Elon Musk or pick your favorite, Bill Gates or whomever, they're never doing so through consensus. They're doing so because they're thinking differently. They're attacking a problem from a unique perspective.
There's a Russian word I can introduce to you. I'm sure some of you are Russian speakers and pronounce this better than I, but ostranение is the word. It's translated into English as defamiliarization. It's from Russian literature where there's a character who goes through something shocking that means that they cannot look at anything in the same way. An event, a phenomenon occurs to them, and what they thought was the motherland is not the motherland anymore. It's an other land. Their entire disposition to who am I in this place and what do I see has fundamentally been changed. It's a great word, ostranenie. And this, I think, is one of the impulses that you can look at in the Gospels.
I don't think conflict is bad.
Right?
I think you can use conflict as a medium to welcome one such child.
Yeah.
I believe conflict is good because it brings out the best and the worst in people, but it does bring out the best if you wait and look for it.
Yeah, correct. Is that your takeaway from this, to make a bit more conflict? I hope so, for some.
The people in this room that know me probably will say yes.
it is, yeah. Okay, this might need to be the last because I'm conscious of time.
I know you made a joke about it, but I kind of like the power of the idea of the power of using like an unconventional prop just to like stop everyone in their tracks and be like, let's rethink like what we're doing here,
Great.
like pulling the small child off the shelf. But yeah, just you know, something to say like, what about this? Like, have you even thought about it this way? Because I think too often, at least as I've seen in my in my work life and conflict, even at high level circles, people get in a rut, they get in a cycle of saying the same thing over and over again, and people are just talking past each other. And so, is there a way to throw something new on the table and make people change their kind of mindset?
Yeah, that is a characteristic of gospel-based processes of conflict intervention. You see it in Jesus of Nazareth in John's Gospel when this crowd are about to stone a person. And she's being used as a pawn as to whether Jesus does or doesn't follow the law. And he scribbles on the ground. My feeling is that it's relatively irrelevant what he was writing, because probably most people couldn't read anyway. But what was relevant was that he caused curiosity in a mob. And that causes a mob to disintegrate. What's he doing? I don't know, I can't see. Can you read? Can you read? I can't read. He can. Can he see? Suddenly their purposes are distracted. And there is a powerful moment right there. And conflict and war theory says that it's the moment right at the crux of when ceasefire is declared, when the most important things can be established. And often people will say, no, let's talk about the important things later on, once we're all, but that just means that people have the possibility of going back to their silos again. Jesus knew something interesting. You can see it exhibited in all 4 depictions of him in the 4 Gospels. Something interesting about what's possible in the intervening moment. So let's finish. And you have church to go to. I have an airplane to go to. Nice to meet you all.
Blessings to you, Pádraig. Thank you for being here.